This manga guide to statistics from the Japan Foundation Library. I found it very interesting. So, continuing on, here we go with the first chapter now, determining data types. So, what are the two data types? One is the qualitative data and quantitative data. So, in the prologue, we saw how Rui, this little girl, is fascinated by her father's employee and she wants to learn from him, but her father gets another, that is Mr. Yamamoto, to teach her statistics. So anyways, she decides, okay, she's going to learn from him and maybe impress Higurashi later on. So just see this. So the heading is categorical data and numerical data. This is what he's going to teach her today. So he'll come every Saturday, once a week, and that's all. So Mr. Yamamoto, what must I learn first? So he thinks, well, a simple example will be better for a beginner, she says. So he says, let me see. And then he says, there's one. So here he says, oh, you have the whole series of Melon High School story. So he goes through that. So she says, yes, it's my favorite comic. Yamamoto says, I confess I'll kind of like this comic too. She says, kind of like? You obviously like it. But what does it have to do with statistics? So he's just flipping through it, and then he takes out this card. Aha, found it. So this is a publisher's card where it has a few questionnaires like Melon High School Story Volume 5 Reader's Questionnaire. What is your impression of Melon High School Story Volume 5? And then there are some choices, multiple choice. Very fun, rather fun, average. Fourth is rather boring, and fifth is very boring. Question 2 is sex, that is female or male. Then age, how many years old. And then fourth is how many comics do you purchase per month, so how many titles. And then whoever finishes this questionnaire and sends it back, then a Rena keychain will be given away to 30 lucky winners among those who send back this questionnaire. And then in the end, it's written, thank you for your contribution. Your valuable opinion will be reflected in our future publication. Disinterestedly, she asks, so what about this questionnaire? So he says, if you answer that questionnaire, you might be able to get a Rena keychain. That is, if you're lucky enough. So, and he says, God, I wish I could win one. So she just puts him off saying, you dork. Now back to studying, he says, so suddenly, just answer that questionnaire, he says. She says, all right. She's finished, says, done. And he says, good. On another piece of paper, we can see him scribble. He's writing something. What he's done is, he's assumed others. First is, of course, Rui, the girl, who has filled up the questionnaire. And the rest, he's put it as A, B, C, D, etc. And he's just to make to show how a questionnaire is understood. So he's scribbling out there, interestingly. So this is what Mr. Yamamoto has made. See, respondent first is Rui, the girl. And question 1 is your impression on Melon High School story. Puts it as, in another column, he puts question 2 as sex. Question 3 as age. And question 4, comic book purchases per month. So then he puts Rui's answers as, she's put as very fun. And then question 2 for sex, she's female, her age is 17, and her comic book purchases per month is 2. And then he has assumed others as A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. And their responses are: A's response is rather fun, female, 17, 1, purchases 1. B says it was average, it's a male, age is 18, and comic book purchases are 5. C is rather boring, says he's male, he's 22 years old, and the comic book purchases are 7. D is rather fun, female, 25 years, and comic book purchases are 4. E is very boring, male, 20, purchases 3. F says very fun, female, 16, and purchases 1. G, rather fun, female, 17, and 2. And H says average, male, 18, and doesn't purchase any. And I, your impression of the Mellon High School story, says average. She's female, her age is 21, and the comic book she purchases is 3. So now he says, suppose the results of the questionnaire look like this. So she says, yeah. So he just jokes. He says, personally, I'm extremely anxious to know if Mellon High School story was well received by the readers. And disinterestedly, she says, look at the expression, you Mellon High School freak. So he comes back to, he said, but let's stay focused. The point of today's lesson is to categorize data. She says, what do you mean? So he says, when you look at data, there are 2 types. Data that you can measure and data that you cannot measure. So 2 types is, so one is that you cannot measure data, and the other is it can be measured. So if you can't measure data, and there are data that can be measured. Okay. So he shows her the questionnaire and says, for example, the answers to the questionnaire can be categorized like this. So this is how. Mellon High School Story Volume 5 Reader Questionnaire. What is your impression of Mellon High School Story Volume 5? Very fun, rather fun, average, rather boring, very boring. So this cannot be measured, he says. And the sexes, and second question is sex, that is female or male. Again, this cannot be measured. So these 2 questions in the questionnaire cannot be measured. So they are qualitative data. Okay. And third is age. So that's given as 17 years, and how many books that you purchase, it's written 2 titles. So these can be measured. 17 and 2 are numerical data. So these can be measured. And so this is what it is. So data that cannot be measured, qualitative data that can be put in categories or graded, and data that can be measured numerically in numbers. So here then you can see further explanation. Data that cannot be measured is called categorical data, and data that can be measured is called numerical data. And categorical data is also sometimes called qualitative data, and numerical data is sometimes called quantitative data. So that's what. So she says, she's trying to understand that. Well, she's not really happy. Can you see the expression? She says she finds it very tricky, the categorical data. And she says, but to me, the first question does not look like categorical data. That is, what is your impression of Mellon High School, etc. Very fun, rather fun. So he says, the teacher, I understand why you feel that way. And she still doesn't understand. She tells me, okay, tell me why it is. So he says, though it does not look like categorical data, this is indeed data that cannot be measured. So she says, how come? Because, he says, data cannot be equally separated. She says, I still don't understand what you're saying. So he says, here's a good example, trying to explain. So he thinks for a while and says, now tell me your... She says, what? So he says, wait. She's upset. That is something you should never ask a lady. She's not happy. Then he says, I'm sorry. Then he says, could you tell me your height? So she says, why didn't you ask that in the first place? So he says, oh, I'm glad you're not upset by this question. So she says, 151 centimeters. So then he says, when you measure your height, you use the scale, don't you? And she says, of course. So under palm, he brings the scale and she stands under it and he says, 151 exactly. It's divided into single centimeters. So the graduation above 151 centimeters, 152, 153 and so on as it proceeds to 153, 154 and so on in equal intervals. If the intervals between each graduation are equal or gradation are equal, this implies that height can be measured and thus is a numerical data type. I see, she's happy about it. Now let's move on to the next example. Now what? So he opens the computer. Let me find some information on the web. So Google, a Mellon High School story wallpaper, she says. I believe you have passed grade pre-2 of the test in practical English proficiency by the Society for Testing English Proficiency. So she says, your father told me, he said. What's that? She asks. I mean, the so-called step test. Oh, that. Yes, I'm a grade pre-2 holder, she says. So he says, guess which type of data the grades of the step test are. Numerical. Got you, he says. So the step test grades. Grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, grade 5. Requirements, advanced university graduate level vocabulary 10,000 to 15,000 words. Then grade 2 is high school graduate level vocabulary 5,100 words. Grade 3 junior high school graduate level vocabulary 2,100 words. Grade 4 intermediate junior high school level vocabulary 1,300 words. And grade 5 beginner junior high school level vocabulary 600 words. Look at the difficulty of the step test grades. So this is how we know. It is from the Society for Testing English Proficiency. So this is the website. So she says there are big differences in the required vocabulary between each grade. Right, he says. But in addition, vocabulary is not the only difference between grades. There are other aspects. So he says thus, the interval between each grade is not the same. That means step test grades are immeasurable data. In other words, they are categorical data. She says, I see. She's so happy that she's beginning to understand how you should be able to answer this question. Again, so he says, Mellon High School Story Volume 5 Reader Questionnaire. What is your impression of the Mellon High School Story Volume 5? Very fun, rather fun, average, etc. So do the answers, so he says, do the answers to question 1 have equal intervals? So happily she says, no, they do not. That depends on each person's taste. Hence, they are categorical data. He says, correct. just to see if she's understood. So he says, so let me give you a quiz. So he says, what is temperature? Temperature is, she says, numerical. Judo rank is categorical. Print run of Mellon High School story is numerical. Weather is categorical, etc. So he says, very good. Now let's end today's lesson. And we see her, she's really worn out. Thank you for the lesson, she says. He says, see you next week. By the way, would you mind if I answer this questionnaire in my name? So she says, and this is what he's asking. Maybe he's doing it out of fun. And she says, he sure is a weirdo. And he bang, closes the door. And she goes to her room. Anyway, statistics is more fun than I thought, she says. I'll be able to work with him because initially she just wanted to learn statistics because she found Mr. Igarashi as a teacher very attractive. So here they've shown how multiple choice answers are handled in practice. So as you can see, very fun, rather fun, etc. These are the categories. But you can also turn them into numerical data. If for say very fun, you can convert it into give some points. So when you convert that, like very fun is 5 points, rather fun is 4 points, average is 3 points, rather boring is 2 points, etc. So in this case, what we see is, in practice, theoretically it is a categorical data or qualitative data, but if you give numbers, we can make it, practically we can make it into numerical data too. So that's important, that's very interesting. They've given an exercise, let's do an exercise and answer. Determine whether the data in the following table is categorical data or numerical data. So respondents are Mr. and Ms. A, B, C, D, E. Blood types are given as B, A, B, O, A. Opinion on sports drink, not good, good. Ms. C says good, D says average, E says not good. And comfortable air conditioning temperatures for them, different is 25, 24, 25, 27, 24. And 100-meter track race record in seconds for Mr. and Mrs. A is 14.1, B is 12.2, this is 17, etc. So in this, can you tell me what is, they've asked you that which is the categorical data, blood type and opinion on soft drinks, X. And if you're talking about, so this will be categorical data, qualitative data. But if you're talking about quantitative data or numerical data, what are these examples? Comfortable air conditioning temperatures in degree centigrade, that is the third column, and this is the track race record. So these are 100-meter track race record and the air conditioning temperature are what is the numerical data. So with that we finish determining data types. They are classified into categorical data and numerical data. So categorical data is what is known as qualitative data and numerical data is quantitative data. So in the next lesson we'll be doing getting the big picture, understanding numerical data.